So Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 is the second half of the first book, and Part 1, which came out in 2021, was just like such an amazing adaptation of the book. Like I'd been a big fan of like the book for a while, and I like the David Lynch film, but it's kind of a bit of a mess. Like there's parts of it that I want to love, but it's not as good as it could be like the book. Thankfully, Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of Dune has been it was great with Part 1. And I was greatly looking forward to Part 2 to see how the director could pull it off, and he does beautifully. In a sense of not just like taking a lot from the book, like there's way more in here than what's in the David Lynch film, including like the director's cut. But like just how Villeneuve kind of like sets it up here. Like he makes it like let's put it this way. I think he's counting on at this point that there will be another Dune film made, because there's way more to continue on with the story, like continuing on into Dune Messiah. And this film, Part 2, clearly sets up the fact that there's going to be more coming. More or less. And even if it doesn't, I still love the way that Part 2 focuses more on kind of like the rise and kind of like the anxiety that's going to come with the eventual fall of Paul Atreides. So, for a little bit of recap. So in Part 1, obviously, Paul Atreides, played by Timothée Chalamet, had his whole house decimated by the Harkonnens on Arrakis. So now he's gone off to live with the Fremen along with his pregnant mother Jessica, who are the last remaining fragments of the Atreides and probably the only hope of striking back against the Harkonnens and getting revenge, even though Paul is much more about revenge than Jessica at this point. Now, what's fascinating about how Jessica, because Jessica and Paul are both fully ingrained within like the ways of like the Bene Gesserit, and they've studied up a little bit on Arrakis and the Harkonnens, they believe that they're able to kind of pull the strings of spirituality and fundamentalism to kind of like to benefit themselves, to more or less seek out revenge. It becomes more obvious for Paul as the film goes on that he's way deep into revenge, to the point where he's not even like questioning how far he's going to go with it. But questioning that aspect of his character is a character who's explored a lot more. Like the biggest credit I give to Villeneuve in this film is that he expands on the roles of Jessica and Chani way more, because Chani, played here by Zendaya, who didn't really have a lot to do in the first part, which makes sense because Paul has visions of her and he doesn't really see her until after he's forced out of the control of her, after his family's been forced out of control of Arrakis. So we get to see a lot of her. And it'd be so easy for her to just be, kind of off to the side and not have as much to say. Whereas in this film, she is very much like a big critique of Paul. Like at first, the build up to it makes sense, because like Chani is a part of the Fremen who's very skeptical. Like she doesn't believe in these century-long myths about how like there's going to be a Messiah who's going to come and it's going to save us all, and that there's this just having faith that a Messiah is going to come. She doesn't believe in any of it. So of course, because Paul is more of an outsider and seems a little bit skeptical, she gravitates towards him a little bit. And they do eventually form like the romance that is expected with the story. But it's more fascinating to watch how Chani reacts to when Paul starts taking on bigger leadership roles within the Fremen, and how he kind of like builds himself up more and more. And Chani is just kind of like watching off to the side, realizing he's too far gone. Like, I'm sticking with him because we want the Harkonnens off Arrakis. But she's like, I don't know, this seems like a big gamble here. And I love how the film more or less focuses a lot more on Chani trying to form her own destiny, whereas with Paul, it feels like his destiny's been laid out before him, both by Jessica, who instructs him more on like their Bene Gesserit ways, and also by Stilgar, who that teaches Paul all about the Fremen and how to survive on Arrakis, and how to be one of the fighters. Basically, how to wage war and how to end up being a leader. Now, there are a lot of parts in this film where, like, I felt it could have faltered. I felt it could have gotten a little bit too distracted by everything else going on, especially with how much ground is covered in part one, because part one jumped around a bit between characters, and I don't really fault the film for that, because it's doing a heavy amount of world building, which is great, because then it sets up everything for part two. Because if like part one was mostly about world building, like setting up of Arrakis and the Harkonnens, and the Bene Gesserit, and giving little hints of like the Padishah Emperor. Part two is, it's fully ingrained in exploring, Paul's rise within the Fremen and Chani's skepticism about him, as well as Jessica being a little bit conflicted about how their time with the Fremen is going to be spent. Now, pretty much like everyone who survived from the last film is still back here. Dave Bautista is back as Raban, the nephew of Baron Harkonnen. Gets to do a lot more in this film. He did get to do a little bit, but here he gets to take command and kind of just falter and just have Vladimir Harkonnen just stare him down, and just the way that, like, for as little screen time as like Dave Bautista, like, he gets more screen time in part two than he is in part one, but he makes it worth it. Like, he makes Raban this like short-fused, angry guy who just, like, if you say or just look at him the wrong way, he'll snap your neck without even like questioning it. Just a hot-headed, short-fused guy. But I mean, that's kind of what you expect with the Harkonnens, because Vladimir Harkonnen is the same as well, once again played by Stellan Skarsgård. And of course, since, he plays a bigger role in that he interacts with the Emperor and all that, you do see a lot more of him in this. And then, of course, the newest addition, to the Harkonnens is Fade Rotha, played by Austin Butler, doing his best kind of not to look like Austin. It feels kind of like at times that Butler's performance here is trying to echo Skarsgård's performance, like almost like he's trying to do an impression of it. Like, Dave Bautista just kind of like in his own world, just being like this hot-headed, short-fused guy who just wants to murder everyone, and Butler's performance as Fade is more, it's a little bit more subtle. He's more violent, he's a little bit more animalistic, but he kind of has like this quiet, sinister nature to him. Even though, like, they, like the Bene Gesserits basically do like a psychological profile on him at one point, about how, like, he's sexually frustrated, he's got mommy issues. So very, very interesting, complex character that I think Butler does well with, even though, like I said, most of the time it feels like he's just trying to copy Skarsgård, as always, like he's like afraid that it could be just direction, but it feels like he's just trying to match Vladimir Harkonnen, so that it makes sense that Vladimir would favor Fade, even though Fade's a lot more contained than Raban. Other additions to this film that we didn't see in part one is we actually do get to see the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, who was not in part one and is crucial to orchestrating everything that goes down on Arrakis, with making sure the Harkonnens take over, with assassinating the Duke Leto Atreides. So yeah, it feels like he's a crucial character, and he should have like a very dominating performance. And you have Christopher Walken, who actually really nails it here. Like I said, not a lot of time spent with him, but just enough where like he has this imposing nature to him, where he has to say so little and just kind of like and dominate the few scenes he has. Like there's a great scene where he approaches Paul at one point and confesses to murdering the Duke, and basically says that we had to take him out because your dad was weak. And it's cold-blooded, and it works so well with Walken's delivery here, which I should probably mention this too. Like I did see this at the Alamo Drafthouse, and they always put these like cute little previews but before like the film comes up that relate to the big movie that you're going to see. And in this case, they had Christopher Walken in the music video where he's flying around the room, and they have like, of course, the lyrics like walk without rhythm, don't attract the worm. So yeah, just a a fun little comment. I had a feeling they'd probably do that when I went into the film. So, also playing Shaddam's daughter, Princess Aurelian, is Florence Pugh, who, she doesn't dominate the film as much for, being more of a narrator, but there's just enough used of her where you can kind of see, the similar aspects of fear and skepticism that Chani has. It very much feels like Villeneuve is kind of, tapping into a lot of the intelligence of these characters and finding actors that can bring out more to them, so that they're not just these simplistic people off to the side, just kind of being more like passengers in Paul's story. So yeah, those are the all the big reveals here of the rest of the cast that's coming back. Now, in terms of how the way the film looks, like I said, I love the world building in the first film, and we get to spend a lot of time within the deserts of Arrakis. Just hanging out with just Paul and Stilgar and Chani and all the Fremen, and it's beautiful to watch. Just the vast landscapes. The biggest, I think a lot of people are going to describe the film this way, is that it's very much a war epic, because there's a lot of scenes where you're just looking out on these vast vistas and you see these legions of armies, and you see the sandworms coming about, and in particular, one of the greatest scenes in the film, there's so many moments that I absolutely love, but I think probably one of the best, and I think this is Villeneuve's favorite scene as well, is the scene where Paul is riding the sandworm. Now this is a great sequence because even though there's not a lot of description in the book, it is one of those sequences where he does prove himself to the Fremen in a big way. So it feels like a lot is weighted on that scene, and there's not a whole lot to go on from the book, where it's up to, whoever is directing it, the adaptation, to make it work, to make it feel like, the Fremen deeply accept Paul, and that taming the sandworm was a big deal and a huge rite of passage. And the way that it's filmed, with the tight close-ups, and just the sand just shooting at Paul as he's struggling to hang on to a sandworm, is just it's intense, it's exciting, and by the time he actually gets up to ride the worm, everyone, all the Fremen are cheering for him, and the soundtrack by Hans Zimmer's cranked up. It's got a little bit, what I feel like is a little bit of a nod to Toto in the original film, which is having the guitars blazing in that moment, which makes it so much more epic. That it's just such a great scene that I felt, that almost kind of that same level of relief that Stilgar has when he's watching this. He's yes, this is just it was written, almost kind of he knew it was going to happen. In a similar sense, I kind of knew that Villeneuve would be able to pull off that sequence in particular, and just watching it come to life is just such, not even just relief. It's just that comforting moment where yes, this story is in good hands, and it's great to watch it unfold here. So yeah, we do get to explore a little bit more of the other planets and their houses, we do get to see Shaddam the Fourth's planet, where it's very much like a green paradise. It's beautiful, it's luscious, and then you compare that to the planet of the Harkonnens, in which color is just drained from the outside world, it's just pitch black and white everywhere, this huge stark contrast, which makes it so bold and just more intense to watch the big arena battle that they have for the time that we get to see Fade introduced in that sequence. Just the way that everything is set up here is just massive and wondrous. I watched this in Dolby Vision the first time I saw it, and it was just astounding. It has this effect that that I felt not just with part one, but also with Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049, where it did feel I wasn't just watching the sci-fi adaptation. It felt like I was, felt like I was on another, as corny as it is to say, it felt like, you were someplace else. Like you lost yourself within this story, within this other world, and all the characters who occupy it, and just like the rest of the world just disappears at that moment. It's that great moment that you love having within film where just like the rest of the world just dissolves away and you're just locked in within like this astounding fantasy that's just epic and beautiful, and you just want to just stay within for so long. Like, I mean, this film is like 2.5 hours, maybe roughly getting close to 3, and it just breezes by. Like, and not just because like Villeneuve covers a lot of ground in the book, but also just because of like the tight direction and how there's like a purpose to every line of dialogue, every vision that Paul has, every astoundingly weird moment, like when Jessica is communicating with her unborn child, when the water of life is extracted, when all the weird Bene Gesserit clothing is donned, and just every odd thing, it feels like, has a place here. And it's not just, look, here's all this weird sci-fi stuff that you've come to expect from Dune. It's like, no, if you've never read the book, this is easy to get locked within, because it feels like there is a progression to the story, and there's a reason for each character, and each weird and wild moment that takes place on Arrakis and off Arrakis within like the second part of the novel. Now, of course, like there's a few things they do change from the novel, like in particular, without giving too much away. They don't include like the time jump, which is a little odd, because like you would think, like, with the amount of time between part 1 and part 2, you would have some time there. But no, like, since they were kind of, zooming right into part 2, they don't have like the time skip, which honestly is fine. Like, because I think that it gives the film more time to focus a lot more on Paul's ascension, rather than just like catching up after the fact. Especially with all like the baggage that would come with introducing Chani and introducing a few other characters who are kind of omitted or a little bit reduced within this story. But I feel like that works for what they're setting up here, because like I said, this is clearly going to be setting up for Dune Messiah, and because like they continue to show you these visions of the anxiety that Paul has about his rise to power, and how like he's just pushes it aside, and he only sees himself becoming like the triumphant hero of Arrakis, while Chani is seeing something much darker grow and fester. So while everyone else is just kind of like, the Fremen are just like, yes, Arrakis is going to be ours, and we're going to be able to start this holy war, Chani's got some reservations about this big holy war that you're going to start with all like the other houses that are going to be competing for Arrakis now that kind of everything has changed by the end of the film. And even if we don't, I'm pretty sure like we are going to get an adaptation of Dune Messiah at this point. But even if we don't, just like everything that is set up here, and just the tone, and like this brooding sense of fearing destiny, and focusing on the dangers of like fundamentalism, and how easily people can be manipulated and warped into doing whatever you want, even if it is for the benefit of their people in that moment. Watching these kind of this rise to power, especially with the way that Villeneuve shoots the beginning and the end of the film. There's almost a little bit of a palindromic nature to how the Harkonnens are framed, and how the Fremen are framed, in which, like the Harkonnens, they wipe out the Atreides, and then the Fremen, they wipe out the Harkonnen. And just watching like the clash there, and just like, most of the characters not questioning this, and Chani being kind of the only one who can see like the writing on the wall here, and Jessica more or less kind of like standing back and just letting the Bene Gesserit lore unfold, was just so fascinating to me. So yeah, it's just like I having seen this film twice, I'm still in love with it. I feel like it's definitely, I mean, not a lot of competition. There's the David Lynch version of Dune, and then there's, the Sci-Fi Channel TV miniseries, which, again, another little promotion for Alamo here, but before the film, they actually did a recap that synced up the 84 film, the 2000 miniseries, and the 2021 part 1 together, and you can kind of like compare and contrast. And when you see them all combined together, and that might seem, might seem a little bit unfair to compare them, but I mean it's the same adaptation. So when comparing them all together, this is easily the best adaptation of Dune by a mile. So yeah, like between like part 1 and part 2 to make this like complete, like roughly 6-hour version of the first book is just astounding. Like the casting has been great since like day one. And everyone brings their A game here. The production design is amazing. Villeneuve puts a lot of work into realizing this world, giving it amazing world building. Hans Zimmer's music is just to die for. It's just like, oh, it's just as amazing as it was in the first film. And, I just love it here. So yeah, what else can I say? Villeneuve did pretty much what I expected him to do with the second part of Dune and a whole lot more. So yeah, I absolutely love this film.